Good morning, everyone. It is 8:36, August 12th, 2020, and I will bring this City of San Angelo Development Corporation meeting to order. Notice is hereby given in accordance with an order of the Office of the Governor issued March 16th, 2020, of a special meeting of the City of San Angelo Development Corporation, COSA DC, scheduled for August 12th, 2020 at 8:30 a.m. The McNeese Convention Center, South Meeting Room, 501 Rio Concho Drive, San Angelo, Texas, will not be open to the public. COSA DC members and staff will attend virtually in order to advance the public health goal of limiting face-to-face meetings, also called social distancing, to slow the spread of the coronavirus COVID-19. There will be no public access to the regular meeting location. A public, free of charge audio video broadcast of the meeting will be available on the city's YouTube channel. The meeting agenda and the agenda packet are posted online at the COSATX.us website. Members of the public who wish to submit public comment on agenda items must send their written comments via email to nora.navarez@COSATX.us by noon, August 11th, 2020. The subject must be in the following format: public comment, item description. August 12th, 2020. All emails must include your name and address. Please note all public comment emails relevant to posted agenda items received by the deadline will be published as part of the agenda packet prior to the meeting and therefore public record. Call 325-653-7197 for staff assistance. A recording of the meeting will be available to the public in accordance with the Open Meetings Act upon written request. And I have asked Director Dendel to open us in prayer this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. If you bow your head with me. Father, first of all, as we come to meet today, Lord, we ask that you help us make wise decisions for the city of San Angelo. And also, as we continue to navigate these unprecedented times, we would pray for the protection and the health of the people for this area and keep it safe in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bill. Moving on to public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, which we don't have. Begin by stating their name and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Board members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The board takes public comment on our regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. And I was told that we have no public comment this morning. So we will move on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda A, consider approving the July 22nd, 2020 meeting minutes, and B, consider approving the necessary corporation disbursements. Do I have a motion and a second?
Move for approval of consent agenda items A and B.
Motion by Director Dendel. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by, I think that was Erica.
Yep.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me call the. Todd, aye. Bill.
Aye.
Ed.
Aye.
Garland. Mr. Freeze. Max.
Aye.
Did we lose Garland?
May have.
Okay, the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I'd like to note too that we were going to do the July financial statements, and those are not available. We will cover those at the next meeting.
Mr. Coles, we need to get Erica's, Miss Laura's vote. Sorry. I didn't hear her say aye. My bad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Erica?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Bill. I apologize, Erica. All right, we will, ayes have it. Motion passes. We will move on to the special agenda. A, consider adoption of a resolution authorizing the board president to negotiate and execute a real estate sales contract with Wisner Holdings LLC, DBA South Plains Lamesa Railroad Limited, SPLR. Is that just one R or two R's?
2 hours,
Two?
2 hours.
Okay. SPLRR for 180.452 acres in Northeast San Angelo out of the J.C. Matthews WCRR County County Survey 178 Abstract 8071 and WCRR County Survey 177 Abstract 4031 for $600,000 in combination with real estate development performance agreement for the development, marketing, and operation of an industrial rail transloading facility necessary for economic development, and authorizing the Director of Economic Development to negotiate proposed terms for the performance agreement. Promissory note and deed of trust with Wisner Holdings LLC, all in a form approved by the city attorney, subject to adoption by the San Angelo Development Corporation Board and approval of City Council. Presentation made by Mr. Guy Andrews, Director of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I get into the presentation itself, I'd like to introduce some participants that we have. First of all, Mr. Shad Wisner, that is the owner of the South Plains Lamesa Railroad, is in attendance to answer any questions we have. We also have heavily involved in this whole process are Michael Looney with the Chamber of Commerce and Roger Horton with Shea Transportation. Now, this particular item involves a particular aspect of a partnership we're formed, and I thought it would be helpful if I could just give you a little bit of brief history and show some of the relationships between the partners in this. This is really involves a partnership. Texas Pacifico, the TXPF, operates the South Orient Rail line that is owned by Texas Department of Transportation. Texas Pacifico leases that and operates that line. That line goes from San Angelo Junction, which is up by Coleman, Texas, runs down to the border to Presidio. And then Texas Pacifico's parent company, Ferromex, operates a rail line that goes down to the port of Topolobampo in Mexico. But once you cross into Mexico, they're able to connect to other rail lines as well. Since they operate this line, nothing happens in our agreements or anything else that is not approved by Texas Pacifico. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. This isn't really a new concept about a rail port, but we're finally getting to the point to make it a reality. I think Michael Looney identified back as early as 2014 that need, as he's talking to different potential clients around the area, that there was a need for rail services. However, Texas Pacifico was really not wanting to be into the local rail service. Their primary interest is moving goods from point A to point B and that. So we began to do a study. Roger Horton, Shea Transportation, and Michael did amazing work in studying to determine how we might go about doing that. They uncovered a whole lot of other information, literally volumes, about what was going to happen when the port at Presidio reopens, the freight volumes that might come and that sort of thing. Our primary goal, however, is focused on developing a rail port that serves local customers. And so that's really kind of what we're involved in today. In the process of all their studies and everything, the other thing that they were tasked with was finding a potential owner operator for the facility. The city of San Angelo does not wish to be in the rail business, so the best case scenario for us is to find an operator willing to provide local services, transload facilities, and that. Mr. Wisner in the process was identified and has expressed the willingness to do that as well. Now, Mr. Wisner will need to have an agreement, which is in process now between TXPF that lines out the rates and how that rail operates and that sort of thing. COSA DC's involvement is that we secured the 180.452 acre park out there. We knew that that was the best location thanks to running up and down that rail with Mr. Horton, Mr. Looney, Mr. Dane, others identified that as the spot where this could take place. And it happens that that property that we purchased has a TxDOT right-of-way for rail on the west side of the property. It looks like an excellent location to put that transload facility in there. So what we're going to talk about today is really sort of a piece of that between COSA DC and the South Plains La Mesa Railroad, an agreement. And so I'll kind of get into that aspects of it. I'm wondering if there are any questions or clarifications needed at this point from anyone.
Any board members have any questions or concerns so far?
Okay, so what we're concentrating on is, and there are lots of other things that could happen with the rail line opening up and the bridge at Presidio and that, but we're primarily concerned, and we've been tasked with making sure that our local customers are serviced by a rail port, and that other potential businesses coming in have an opportunity to have rail as an alternative. So just reiterating, we went through a year-long market study, determined that there is a need for the inland rail port in San Angelo to serve industrial and agricultural enterprises with both importation and exportation of bulk freight commodities. Again, we purchased that 180.452 acres at the vicinity of the Texas Pacifico classification yard with the intent of building an inland rail port terminal. And our goal, as I'll reiterate that, was always to find a experienced rail operator with whom we could enter into a public-private partnership for the operation of a rail transload facility to serve our local customers and providing them with lower cost transportation services. And I'll reiterate that Mr. Wisner's, who we've identified, he owns a railroad. The South Plains La Mesa Railroad is a rail road itself, and so there are benefits that will accrue to that. Mr. Wisner operates in Slayton, Texas, a facility that would be very similar to the one that we're proposing here in San Angelo. He also transloads in Pueblo, Colorado for Vestas Energy, the wind towers, wind blades, and that sort of thing. And so a very experienced operator that has shown the willingness to partner with us in this enterprise. Again, here is the rail port facility, the 180.452 acres. At the top of that is FM 2105. That road is probably destined to become part of the new bypass route that will connect US 67 and 87. So that's the property we're proposing. We wanted to make sure before we ever really got started that this rail port would work. So Mr. Schneeman laid out with the help of Mr. Horton and others a potential track layout, and so we have shown that that's done. This facility will be built as customers come in, so it's not a build out of the facility all at one time. As we identify potential customers, then those rail lights will be put in. But we wanted to show conceptually that that was possible. Now, in regard to that, in the process, Mr. Horton and Mr. Looney have identified numerous potential customers in this process that could operate in that. So we feel really strongly Texas Pacifico is doing a small amount of transloading that they'll probably want this facility to handle, since they've expressed the desire not to be in the transload facility. One of the delays, I think, in this project was that we were waiting for Texas Pacifico to decide if they actually wanted to perform this function or not. And so through a long process of working through their parent organization and that sort of thing, they gave us in writing that they would support us operating a rail facility and would do everything in their power to make that work. So in that regard, they're entered into the agreement with Mr. Wisner. What we're proposing to do is to sell the 182 acres to Mr. Wisner under a contract for a price of $600,000 with a term of 6 years. It would be financed by the Development Corporation at 0% interest with annual payments of $100,000. However, in association with this contract and the sale of that, we will enter into a development agreement, economic development agreement, where those payments can be forgiven if performance measures are met. So in this action by a resolution, it's authorizing, this resolution would authorize our board president to enter into that sales contract. And then it also authorizes me to negotiate the terms of a performance agreement with Mr. Wisner in regard to the operation of this. So we feel like that this is a very win-win strategy in regard to that. Performance measures are something we negotiated, but to give you an idea, some that we've laid out and kind of reached agreement on is that SPLRR would have a track services agreement with Texas Pacifico prior to the close on that, that they would have adequate track in place to service its initial contracted customers. Need to mention that they will be investing millions of dollars into those track facilities. The reason that we want them to have ownership is to cut through the regulations and stuff that we have to go through, that we would have to go through under a lease agreement. This makes this whole thing work a lot better. So by them being the owners of that property, they will have control over it, but regulated to a certain degree by our performance measures that we've got. So we have a few strings attached to it, and we have clawback arrangements in place in that contract. But again, it is a public-private partnership, a trust relationship in there, so we don't want to make that onerous. They need to be open for business to service local customers prior to the end of next year. It'll take time to get everything in place. And one of the things just to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction is that we will begin immediately having periodic meetings on at least a quarterly basis to make sure that we're dealing with potential customers, trying to reach agreements with them, and we're all on the same page. So the chamber will be involved as a partner in that as well. The chamber, as you know, is our marketing organization, so they're heavily involved in the process. So at that point, I'd be glad to open it up for questions from the board, and Mr. Wisner and Mr. Looney and Mr. Horton, if they are available for additional questions or clarifications that you might have.
All right, board, we have any questions, concerns that y'all would like to ask or raise?
I have a question. What's the closest rail port to us currently in operation once this one's up and going?
Well, I can answer that. I believe Fort Stockton is probably close. There are some facilities that, well, there are none that are offering really the transload facilities. Fort Stockton deals primarily with oil and gas. Over at Big Lake, they were primarily concerned with sand and that sort of thing. On down along the the line is Alpine. They're not at all interested in this. They want to see how fast they can be bypassed by this when this rail line opens. And of course, Presidio is where the port is located. And once that opens, there's probably little need for them as that crosses the border to have transload facilities, but all of those are involved. And we have been meeting, thanks to, again, to Roger and Michael, periodic meetings with all of the participants along that line to make sure. Further up the line, the closest actually is San Angelo Junction at Coleman, and that connects with the BNSF, which then goes over to Brownwood, connects with the Fort Worth and Western Railroad. There are other, Granbury is along that line, and we certainly want to have our operation in place before they ever catch on to what all is going on in regard to this port. So hope that answers that question.
Yes, sir.
We're the main one. Actually, when Michael and Roger first showed up at a Presidio border planning meeting in Fort Stockton, and the other participants were there, it was like, hey, San Angelo's here. Tell us what you want to do, because since we have Texas Pacifico headquartered here, they view us as the driver of this whole operation. So we're in an extremely good strategic position to open up this operation and take advantage of it. Again, let me reiterate once more that our initial goal is for the local operations, but there could be things that develop when that port at Presidio, the bridge is fully open and everything's in place. There'll be other opportunities, and we want to be open and up and running by the time that takes place.
And in comparison with the other rail lines or the ports that you kind of mentioned, transload facilities, how does this compare size-wise and load-wise of what the others are doing right now?
The other ports are really small and they're specialized operations. So what you'd see at Big Lake would be primarily a sand unloading operation. Fort Stockton is primarily concerned with oil and gas, and they're all smaller operations. What we have, this would be by far the largest rail port on the entire line.
Guy, if I may, I think probably and Roger could maybe pipe in on this as well, but probably the closest from a highway standpoint to San Angelo would be Sweetwater, that would have a function similar to ours. I do believe we have customers now who are trucking product from San Angelo to Sweetwater to have it transloaded on the rail. And Roger can pipe in.
That facility, however, is on Union Pacific line, and I assume that you were talking about on the South Orient line, which would be the closest, but that is true. Sweetwater does operate a facility. There's a potential that we could take some business from them in regard to, especially to agricultural products that are being shipped through them now, that some of that business would come down here. And there have been conversations that Mr. Hort, Mr. Looney have had with agricultural producers that this would be a great benefit to them to have this facility. Roger and Michael, either of you want to chime in on that aspect?
Yes, yeah. All right. The there are two facilities in Sweetwater that are really relevant to our cause here. One is a large warehouse where cotton lint is shipped out of. It's stored and shipped for distribution. That sits on the BN, and it's strictly a cooperative warehouse that's owned by a bunch of producers. It's exclusive to cotton. There is a BNSF facility at Sweetwater that was put in probably 5 years ago, maybe, or 6. It was designed as a sand transloading facility. I believe it even has complete with silos to store the sand in. But the way the facility was designed originally, it is really only conducive to unit train operation and sand unloading. To turn that facility into something like what we have proposed to build would take a major overhaul. You literally pull the tracks up and rebuild the whole thing. So it has never been put into production as any kind of a universal transload facility. The quick answer to the question about location, Mr. Wisner can address it as better than anybody, because the closest location we have to this facility that would do exactly the same kind of work would be the South Plains and Lamesa Railroad in Slayton, Texas. And if you want details as to how that operation functions, Mr. Wisner is right here.
I'm happy to explain a little bit there of what we do, and I would invite anyone to, if you look at Slayton, Texas on a Google map, you just hit satellite, you see our facility, it shows up. It's obvious. The portion that of our facility that I believe transfers very nicely to the land that's been acquired by Costa DC will be what is our western portion. You'll see tracks that run out across the ground there. It's our facility right there is 168 acres, inclusive of our office. And you can see we have a road laid out along the west side. There are multiple transloading tracks there. There's a 11-acre pad that we have had wind towers transload on. We've had sand, we've had crude oil. We have used oil. We have Nutrien has a facility located on our property. That's evident on the map there as well. The portion that would not transfer to your property would be sort of my mainline yard with there's a big white building that's a shop. That portion would not. But the build out on what we call our rail park, that portion would be very similar to the build out that you would see on your property. So I would invite anyone, like I said, just Google map that and hit satellite on Slayton, Texas, and blow that up, and you'll see that very representative of what that'll look like. I interchange with the BNSF right near my property. I have a Y that's got 2 connections to the BN. Pretty similar to having the Texas Pacifico yard basically adjoin that property. And Texas Pacifico has been very cooperative thus far in supporting our operation of that. It's just not in their wheelhouse. I questioned them specifically about why they weren't interested in building it out, and they're just focusing on their line going south and that bridge at Presidio. That's their focus, and they really, from visiting with local management there, they just don't feel like it's what they do, and they won't be able to do that. Their anticipation is that they'll be extremely busy with through freight when that bridge gets open. That's what they're banking on, and they just feel like that a third-party operator would be the best fit on that build out. So that's where we come in, and we feel like that in a complementary way, the switching is what we do. That is what all of our operations are, switching operations focused in a yard, if you will. So it's what we do in Colorado, it's what we do here at Slayton, and it's what we anticipate doing there in San Angelo. So it's kind of a split between what we feel like we do best and what they feel like they do best. So I think we're going to be working well together. And like I said, thus far, they've been very supportive of having a third-party operator in there. And I think we're going to be able to get a mutually advantageous deal done pretty quickly.
Just wanted to point out that the reason that we have chosen Mr. Wisner is because this is what he does for a living. He actually has the railroad. South Plains Lamiso Railroad is a railroad, so he will be able to take advantage of potential grants that might come up, federal grants and other things like that. In examining other operators, if you went with one of the majors, there's no guarantee really that they wouldn't use the facility for another reason. So that's why we had the particular performance agreements in dealing with somebody that's a private operator that we can trust and to do the type of operation that we want to see coming out of this and not lose control of it. So while we're selling the property and Mr. Wisner will own it, we still have connections in a public-private partnership, us and the chamber. Mr. Horton is still involved with doing some work with Texas Pacifico. And so we have, I think, a really good, solid organization to make this facility happen and happen as soon as possible.
I have a clarification question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So that land already has track on it, or right next to it, and it was owned, or it was originally put down by Texas Pacifico?
No, that land has an old right-of-way attached to it. There's no track on it at this point.
Okay.
There's the right-of-way for the track. Where track used to be is still there, and TxDOT owns that across. So TxDOT is working a lease on that with Texas Pacifico, and Texas Pacifico then will sublease the use of that to me. So I'll be able to use that old main, but I have to put that main back. There's no track currently. That crossing is there on East 50th Street, and the track ends just a few feet past that crossing. So there's no track across the property at all at this point.
Okay, so then TxDOT gives Texas Pacifico the right to build it, and then they sublease it to you, or TxDOT is the owner?
TxDOT owns that property, that old right. They will lease that to Texas Pacifico. Texas Pacifico will sub it to me.
Okay.
As part of our operations agreement that we create with Texas Pacifico.
And then they will do the servicing of it, the general.
I will service it.
Oh, okay.
I will have my people and my equipment on location to serve the facility.
Okay.
And that's the other aspect, is that Mr. Wisner will be bringing in the equipment to operate that, which is a significant investment as well that he'll be bringing to it. You know, part of this agreement, what we're doing is incentivizing him in a way, paying him for his expertise that he brings in, and it really takes the burden off of the city in terms of attempting to operate that. And as I've said from day one, is we certainly don't want to be in that business. It's extremely expensive, complicated, and lots of room for failure if we do it. So by having a trusted private partner in there, we feel very confident that we're going to accomplish what our goals are.
Okay. Any other board members, questions, concerns?
I just have a quick question. In comparison to Shad's other operations, how does the size of our potential facility here compares? Is it bigger or is it smaller?
It's actually my facility at Slayton that we call the park area is 168 acres. So your facility actually has more acreage, and as you'll see if you look at that, it lays out very similarly. Our old main line, which was an old Santa Fe main line, cuts across a piece of property that's wide on one end and narrow on the other, just like your property. So there'll be a lot of similarities in the way it lays out. It'll be very similar. We have an additional 179 acres that we have purchased here at Slayton, but we have not yet built on that. We have not built that out yet. The portion we have built out is actually a little smaller than what you've got. In
Very
Colorado,
comparable.
our facility in Colorado is located on an Army base. So there's about 28 miles of track on that base, and it's scattered over a couple of thousand acres on that Army base. So that's a big spread out facility up there. And then in Colorado, our other operation in Colorado is plant switching. And it's basically a 2-mile oval with a couple of side tracks. So it's a little different as well. But park to park, yours is a couple acres larger than our build out here at Slayton.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions, concerns?
I have one other question. Well, I have one
Go
other
for
question. As far as the facility goes and things of that nature, what manpower, how many jobs does this create? What kind of employment does this bring to the community?
The kind of employment it'll bring is, well, here at Slayton, we have a 5-man crew that works 5 days a week, daylight hours, and then plus support staff. So there are about 4 of us here in the office that do support staff, and we're also supporting our other operations in Colorado as well. So in Colorado, I have 10 employees in Colorado. What I anticipate there is, frankly, unless it gets to be bigger, faster than I anticipate, we'll be running that quite a while with probably a 3-man crew. That's really all we'll need to do small switching, which is what that's going to be. It's close quarters, small switching. A lot of what you'll see, I think, in the economic benefit is going to be the ripple effect of our presence, which is going to be for local businesses to have the opportunity to take advantage of rail transportation where it makes sense to them. If they can gain efficiencies and save some monies, then that may put them in a better position to hire more people, win more contracts, do whatever it is they do, because they can utilize those efficiencies of rail. But direct employment, it's not going to create 50 jobs for my operation. What it will do is it will create a small handful. I'm anticipating 3. If we really grow and get really busy, we could be up to 5 guys perhaps there in the future. But it's the ripple effect of that operation that I think is going to really benefit your community from the economic side.
Hey, Shad, it's Michael Looney. Can you speak a little bit about not just the employment potentials, but also the capital investment of the infrastructure that would be put on the property, including engines and locomotive power and the other components needed to build it out for multi-commodities?
Sure. That's what could actually be invested on that property could be certainly, in the end, it could certainly easily be in the tens of millions of dollars. I anticipate our initial build out will be right in the neighborhood of a $1 million build out. That's going to put rail back on the old road bed, and that's going to build some track into the park area with access. Along with this, you're going to have road infrastructure that will be built. So because you have to have access to the rail, there could potentially be warehousing. There could potentially be, as you would see if you looked on our place at Slayton. I have 2 shops slash offices that we have built to suit for customers. Each of those, one of those is about $100,000 build out. The other one was about $170,000 build out that those customers utilize for their equipment. Our own rail equipment there, I anticipate 2 locomotives. So that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 of locomotives there on site. Probably a lot of the other support equipment I'll transport from Slayton on an as needed basis. If I need to bring my tamper down or I need to bring in my tie exchanger, I'll just transport that down, because it's not going to make a lot of sense only having, let's say the first build out nets 15,000 feet of rail. I don't need a $100,000 tamper sitting there so that I can tamp 15,000 feet of rail. I can move mine down there, run through it and bring it back, because here at Slayton, we're only 5 miles long, but we're up to 23 miles. We've built up 23 miles of track here on our facility. So those things will be there. If we get agricultural based customers who are interested in coming on, we could easily see some warehouse space go up to service them. We could see tanks go up to service perhaps liquid fertilizer distributors. We could see silos go up for dry flowable storage. We could see a lot of that build out right there on that facility, because that will be where some of those end users find the efficiency to come in there and unload from a tank car, let's say a liquid fertilizer, directly to a tank. And then what they end up basically having then is a truck terminal. So their trucks can go in there and pull off of those tanks and go make deliveries. They don't really have to move that from that tank car all the way to their brick and mortar facility. They can build the storage there if that's what suits them. So you could potentially, I think, see sort of a small industrial park there, but it wouldn't be like your industrial park that you have going there, where you've got the actual businesses located there. It would be probably more like the satellite location where a person leaves their tanks, or that's what I envision. That's where a person's tanks are located, or their warehouse is located, is over on that property, because it's easy to handle with the rail. Does that answer your question, or were you looking for something more specific?
Nope, that answers it perfectly. Go ahead, Roger.
Just to add something, Mr. Weisner just outlined some business scenarios with such as large storage tanks or silos or warehouse space. Michael and I have uncovered over the last year and a half, literally every one of those opportunities has been placed on the table in front of Michael and I by local businesses within the last year and a half. It's here. It's not something that we have to really cultivate. It's just something we have to develop.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Questions, concerns? I have a few things here that I'd like to say. First, I want to say that this, in my opinion, this is exciting. This is something that we want. This is something that we've had planned for this property since the very beginning of looking at it and having the dream of building this out into a railport that would service our community. This was a great project for us. The closing on it from the previous owner was a nightmare at times, but it was a project that we kept pushing and we really wanted to get done. And it's exciting to see where it's going to go. We have all agreed that we don't want to be in the business of, being a transport company. That is Mr. Weisner's expertise. And I think it's refreshing to see an expert coming in that wants to take this project and run with it. And I think we would all agree as a board that that is exactly what we've had in mind for this. The concern I have is not about the project itself. It's about the way we're going about giving this land to a potential operator. We bought this land, and now we're going to sell it to Mr. Wisner under a performance agreement that, so long as he does what's in that performance agreement, he does not have to make the payment he owes us. And at $600,000 over 6 years at 0% interest. So, as I understand it, we don't want to be in the business of being a transport operator, but we will still own this land. It's still going to be ours. If something happens and he decides he doesn't want to do this, or something is in default on the current deal, we get this back. We get the property back. So we're basically the bank on a mortgage here. Okay, we're going to get it back if something happens. Now, I certainly don't anticipate that happening, and I think he's ready to go with it. You can tell, but we still have to look at this as a wise business decision. So my question is, instead of giving the land away over 6 years, can we go ahead and sell the property now and work on giving him incentives back over the next 6 years to more or less pay back what he has already bought? It gets us out of the deal. Because, I mean, if we're gonna do it this way, there's a ton of questions that I think still haven't been answered. Are we going to have to verify all of the steps and everything that he's doing? How often is the performance agreement going to be checked? I mean, he's got 12 months to do this, which we still haven't even seen what this is over the first 12 months. But are we going to be going out there every week, 2 weeks, every month, every 6 months? Or are we just going to go out there in 12 months and say, looks like you did it? Like, how does all that work?
Within the performance agreements, we outline that. And one of the safeguards we have in that we have identified and listed out is that we will have periodic meetings on this to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction in terms of the performance agreement. So, basically we are providing him incentives. We're not giving him the land. He is having an opportunity as an incentive to buy that or to own that land. But and that happens at an annual basis of forgiveness of that payment. That's an incentive payment, and I realize it's not the normal way that that we do business, but this is not I don't consider this to be a normal project. One of the things we want to make sure that happens is Mr. Wisner needs to at least break even during this process. And so that's why we're partnering with him, is to make sure that he's not having an outlay of cash up front and is going into that debt, so that that he can do that. So again, it's a public-private partnership. It's not something we've done. We're utilizing him to provide a public service rather than us doing it. So the deal structure may be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, but it's still the same principle. He will be earning the incentives over a period of time. And the incentives is that he eventually owns that property. And he's given 6 years to prove that he can do that. And so that's my philosophy on it. I'm open for additional input.
I guess the concern also is, I mean, if it's taken 6 years for him to take full ownership of it, is, I mean, say there was an environmental issue or something like that at the translate, I mean, is that solely on him and his insurance, or does that fall back on the city? Things of that nature.
We're selling this property to him, and basically he has issued a warranty deed. It's just like if you went out and bought the house. What you do with your house after that's not really on the mortgage company or anything else. So that he takes on the liability. He carries insurance for that type of thing in the operations. I believe it's a $15 million, $30 million policy to cover that. So he basically is just like what that allows him to do by having the warranty deed and have ownership is not to come back to us at every step to do that. So, I mean, it's just like you say you own your house, you really don't. The mortgage company does, and it's the same thing here since we're the mortgage company.
Well, and the reason I asked was from the banking perspective as well, is I've repoed property and it's had environmental issues from that previous owner, and I've had to pay for the cleanup. And so that's part of the negotiation of selling it back and putting it back on the market. That's why I asked those questions, is because if we're going to be acting like a bank, and that's what I do, it's, you got to ask these questions to where does it fall back on? I mean, I guess what like Todd's indicating is if it's a sale, it's a sale and there's no carrying of anything. It's out of our hands. And I think that's the main concern, is he wants to know that that's once the transaction is solidified and the performance agreement's in place, if we get it back, what's the repercussions of us having to go back to this process again? Or is it just a clean, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, it's just, I think what you're trying to say is you just want to, go ahead and do the transaction and we're out of it. And he does his project and, obviously we'll monitor it from whatever performance agreement for tax incentives or employment, things of that nature. But I think that's Todd's concern, maybe.
That's just a small part of it. But yeah, that's part of the deal, is acting as the financier in this deal. Is
let me bring
you can think that we're not involved and that we've just passed this on and he's bought it. That's not the case. It's just simply not. A mortgage company does have quite a bit to do with your home as far as the responsibility of that home.
Let me bring in Dan into the conversation, our attorney, and talk about, Dan, are those types of things included in the performance agreement where we make specifications for what happens in eventualities and all of that sort of thing?
Right. You're talking about risk allocation, and the sales contract is in combination with a performance agreement, and it's conditioned on reaching that performance agreement that's approved by both this board and the city council. So normally what would be included, and I would anticipate, and Mr. Weisner can talk about it, but he's already said right off the bat, $1 million invested in the land. Periodically, if there's outside financing, and this note will be recorded as a vendor lien, the board's going to have to consent to subordinating that lien based on progress. And if that progress is there, I think, that the board should anticipate, yes, we will subordinate. We'll have even we'll have a commitment that that financed money is going to go into improvements on that land. If there was some disaster or a failure of some kind and the city foreclosed, first of all, I think it would, we probably would be looking at a judicial as opposed to a non-judicial foreclosure, because there are performance obligations that there could be disagreements about the status. It's possible then that the city would take it back with partial improvements and liens ahead of the city liens. And so in fact, it would be a partnership to that extent if the city subordinated its first in line security in the property. Yeah, but I think Mr. Wisner, has thought a lot of this out and has some idea of, say, after the first year on an operational basis, what the city should expect, if anything, about subordinating the $600,000 note.
May I address that? I had a meeting with my banker yesterday. We had lunch together. And what we agreed to in principle was that any financing I need to conduct that build out, he's going to accept the railroad at Slayton's unencumbered. So he will accept as collateral for that build out property I have here at Slayton. Therefore, that property remains, you will not have a subordinate lien. And then what I talked to him about is then when the 6 years were up or the property was paid for in whatever event that happened, then he would convert my note with him to what applied to that build out. And he would transfer his collateral as the build out and put it where property goes. But what I talked to him about was not, because I don't want to convolute the issue. I don't, and I have plenty of collateral here at Slayton. He agreed with that. He thought that was something we could do without a problems. Collateralized property at Slayton for the San Angelo build out, so that it does not get encumbered by the bank and have a problem there until I've got it paid for. The other thing that I had visited with Guy about, we tend to not carry a lot of debt. So if this thing is successful, to be honest with you, I can't imagine that we don't accelerate the payoff. Even though it's at zero interest, it's still debt on the balance sheet. So we tend to just carry what debt we cash flow everything we can. And we tend to just carry what debt we have to carry for operations or for a project that, like in this case, it hasn't been a long-term vision. It kind of came up pretty quickly, and we may have to have some financial help. However, that's one thing. And I feel confident if I needed to get a letter of understanding from the bank that up to a certain amount, we have financing available without the attachment of your property, because we have, unencumbered property here in Slayton.
I
think now's the time to get these questions out so we can get answers, and it gives Guy guidance and Shad an idea of what the board's expectation is. So Todd, I think if you've got questions, I think we all go through them.
Yeah,
we will.
I like the way, I like, Chad, that you already visited with your banker. I mean, that's respectable, and that's a transaction that leaves the subordination out of it for sure. So I like that you already did that and had that conversation. So that's something I would structure as well. So I respect that, and glad you already had that conversation with your banker.
He was very receptive to doing it that way. He understood the complications that would cause with you guys financing that, and if they stepped in with a primary lien, it would just be so much cleaner. And like I said, we're unencumbered here. Our railroad carries zero debt. Larry Weiser LLC, the purchasing entity, if you will, carries a little bit of debt. However, I can tell you on our balance sheet, it's nothing we couldn't write a check for and pay off. So we're, financially we're secure, and we do have the backing of our bank, which is Plains Capital Bank here in Lubbock.
Under the performance agreement, that's a document that we have to bring back. What this particular action does, if I understand correctly, is that it allows me to negotiate that. So that aspect of it is basically still on the table. Once we have additional conversations and get all that lined out, then we bring that back to the board. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, that's correct.
So those details are in the negotiation of the performance agreement.
And one thing we can do to shorten this term is we could shorten this term. If I paid you $100,000 down, then that would make the following payments, the following 6 payments, then would actually fall. It would become a 5-year term instead of a 6-year term. And if we made the payments go ahead, and I'm just throwing this out, but if we made the payments in advance, then we could either move the performance objective credits, if you will, to the back end, or we could move those to more of a rebate type of program. Either one of those options to me would be worth considering, but I don't have a problem, making the first payment up front at closing. And then at that point, like I said, then it actually shortens your term by a year. And then it puts skin in the game, if you will, up front from me, so that, you can see, I've got that made. It doesn't end up being like a 0 down, 0 interest type of thing. I've got a payment up front. So you've got, I've got skin in the game from day one. And I don't know if that allays all of your concerns, but it does put money in the pot. And then if you were to create rebates or move those performance objective credits to the end, it might just pay off sooner. Is that,
It might be worth looking at. I don't know if that would be a benefit. It sounds like it would be a little bit better, but again, I don't know if we would need to ask that of you or not. My main concerns are all of the little things that we're going to have to make sure of as the lien holder, as the body that owns this land still. Okay. How long does this take to build?
Well, our previous agreement was that, or what we had discussed, Guy and I basically, was that we would be open for business by the end of 2021. The build out of how long does it, that's the end of next year, that we're going to have, tracks available with access for transloading by the end of next year. I can't go out there and build, I can't run out there and in the first phase build the whole thing out. That'd be a $12 million project.
Sure.
I can't do that, but we could get open, and then I feel like, from my perspective, I want to see it grow due to demand. I want to see it grow organically. And as you've been around yourself, if the economy takes a dump, demand takes a dump. So if we have a severe turn in our economy, I could go a couple of years before I ever had anyone kicking my door and saying, I need a space over here. So we want to certainly be prepared to accommodate demand, but at the same time, it just doesn't make economic sense to run out there and build the whole thing out at one time. I can tell you, when you look at Slayton, we've gone from 5 miles to 23 miles, and it's been 20 years in the making. It certainly wasn't overnight.
So we're going to build it out, get it going, wait for the demand to come in, and then we're going to continue to build it out.
That's my intention. Yes, to build out on demand. That's our business model.
And I can only assume that there's state and federal regulations as to the layout and as to the construction of something like this.
There are. Well, as a railroad and as a rail park, we'll be federally regulated.
Yep.
So we'll be regulated by the FRA as far as operations, track condition. The FRA basically regulates every aspect of railroad operations, exclusive of the business side. The business side is regulated by the STB.
And allow me to ask these questions, Shad. Because I have to come at this from worst case scenario. Okay. This is absolutely no hit on your way or ability to run your business. Okay. But who on our end is going to make sure that those state and federal regulations are being met?
That's not necessary, to be blunt. The federal regulator will fine me if I haven't met it. And to be honest, particularly, I mean, it's not, yeah, frankly, I mean, I'll be blunt. You don't need anyone involved in that. That's the regulator's job, is to regulate. You don't need an intermediary between a regulator's job, between a regulator and my operation.
Okay.
Now, in having a service agreement with Texas Pacifico, there again, they, I'm sure, will have caveats in their service agreement that they'll refuse to serve me under certain circumstances. Those would include conditions being unsafe, or probably most of their caveats. I'm sure if we have any caveats in our interchange agreement with them, they're going to concern track condition and safety. But I would suggest, there again, to be blunt, if there's a meat processing plant there in town, you don't send your guy in there to be sure all of the USDA regulations are being met before the USDA regulator shows up.
Well,
in terms of the other aspects in the agreement, let me just add this too, is that in any agreement, we have an administrative burden that has to happen, verification that goes on. And so like if we're incentivizing someone and every year they have to report to us, they have to report to us once the capital investment's made, they have to report to us, and we have to monitor and record that, or the number of employees they have, in order to verify the incentive. So are we going to have an administrative burden? Yes, just like we always do.
Well, and to go to that, if it has to do with one of the performance objectives, or something to which there's an incentive tied, then absolutely. And that's part of the having a meeting no less than every quarter, where I would be able to make updates and give updates to where we are on that. As far as the build out, things like that go, it'll be there on the ground. I mean, you'll see it happen. That's going to be a drive-by verification on that yes, this is being done, and they're here, and they're getting that done. If that's what you're talking about, was for those incentives, yeah, that'll be conducted during the meetings and our no less than quarterly reports, if you will.
My main question was, if we get this back in a clawback for whatever reason, when we go out there and someone comes in and says, wait, you can't build it this way, it's got to be done this way. You're telling me that the regulators are already regulating you so that we will not be faced with that problem. That's my question. Who on our end is making sure that what you're doing out there is going to still be viable to try and sell this property to someone else again if we need to? That the city's not going to be stuck with having to rip it up or redo it, or that's my concern.
Well, that's going to be something that if you wanted to hire a consultant to check that out and see if they think that what I'm doing is adequate or has long-term design viability or something like that, then that would certainly be up to you.
Well, and it may just be that we put in the agreement that whenever the regulators come and inspect your property, that we get a report. We get something to.
You can certainly state as well that construction complies with accepted industry standards and things like that, if you want to do that. But and as far as like building railroad track, there are 9 actually technically 10 different classes of track, ranging from what's called accepted track, which has mandatory maximum speed limit of 10 miles per hour. You can't move over 5 hazmat cars over that at a time. It's pretty rough track. All the way from class 1 track, counterintuitively, is the worst track. And then it moves up as the number grows, the track gets better. Class 1 track sounds like that's the best track. It's actually the worst track next to accepted. Accepted track is a classification you can file with the FRA that says, our track is really bad, but we're working on it and we're creeping around on it for right now. Accepted track is to be eventually come out of that designation because you've made significant enough improvement to get it up to class 1. But class one track is adequate to do everything that you're going to want to do. There'll be no 60-mile-an-hour coal trains running down that track. Class 2 track is a little better. You'd be getting up into class 3 and 4 track, which would be, in my opinion, ridiculous to build there because there's absolutely no demand. You'll never see 25 miles an hour in that rail park. Those are the things you're doing as you increase the classification of the track. So if you would like, we could agree on a track class, and that is an easily definable term, if you will, to say that the class will meet a minimum of class 1 standard, because that's something that is definable. 10 track inspectors should go out there and look at that, and out of 10 should all come back and say this is class 1 track. At least 9 of them. There'll be a jerk in that group of 10, but at least 9 of them should come back and say this meets that qualification. So something like that I'm happy to talk about, and we can kind of sit down and look at those classifications or look at those requirements for classification, and we can certainly designate a minimum classification for the trackage. That would be what you're talking about, is someone else comes in and says, man, this track, you can't even run on it. As far as the layout goes, that's all personal opinion. And I may think this is going to work great like this. Someone else may come in after that and say, oh, I would have never done it like this. This is how I would have done it. Either one of those. I mean,
well, it's the little questions like what you just answered. I think that's a great idea, but it's also what's the rule about hazmat materials coming in on this kind of layout, and then we get the property back and they're going, wait, you can't run hazmat on this layout. All of those little details matter a lot on our side of things, and it doesn't seem like we've got a way to do our due diligence to make sure that we know exactly what we're getting back, if that is the case. Another question I have: do we look over the agreements that you have with Pacifico or any other users of this line? Do we have something in there, Dan, that we need to go and make sure that the agreements he has with Pacifico make sense and that are viable and are good agreements for what he's trying to do?
Yeah, normally we have a provision about what business records would be available, and some presented, like Mr. Weisner is talking about, quarterly, for some available on request. So and I already have a note down, regarding the lease and what those terms are between Pacifico and the South Plains Lamesa Railroad, so that we're aware, because the property is under, those constraints as well as whatever sublease there is with Mr. Weisner. So to answer your question would be, yes, those records would be available. We would need to have a working knowledge, and we have consultants, about what we should know or what we should be asking about. And so like we're not in the railroad business. The city has not been. So, and that's the reason to have consultants. And then all of this would be hashed out with Mr. Wisner. He's working with his bankers. He's familiar with the railroad regulation. And so all of that would be ironed out, or actually laid out. And in laying that out, I think the city, in my experience with these contracts, is because we're involved a lot of times in a lot of businesses on incentives that we're not in that business, but we get educated in working out these agreements. And that's the reason for an agreement, is to anticipate, like you are, what the possibilities are. And so there are no surprises, so that we've already covered that ground. And that will be our objective in putting together the performance agreement.
If I may also, in visiting with Texas Pacifico, while we don't have anything on paper yet, just what we have verbally discussed, they seem open to starting at a 25-year lease and interchange agreement. So that gives us a nice long chunk of time there, made me much more comfortable than starting off with a 3-year deal. And I don't know what's going to happen after 3 years. So they've expressed that they're comfortable starting off somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 years. So that would be there again in Todd's worst case scenario examples of where you end up with it back. You'd be the successor in interest to what was left of that 25-year sublease. So it wouldn't be like you get it back and there's 1 year left on the lease, and now after 1 year you can't even cut a deal now with Texas Pacifico and you end up in rough shape. There's a good longevity in the initial lease. I was pretty pleased that Texas Pacifico seemed open to go that kind of distance on the first lease.
Kind of in summary, I guess that what we're really saying is, Todd, these are great concerns that you have, and they're things that can be addressed in the performance agreement, and it's good having the conversation, but that comes in the actual determination of that performance agreement, which is yet to come. We have a basic idea, some of the points. You've given us more points, other input from the board. So when we begin to negotiate that, we will all get together and make sure that all of those concerns are addressed in the performance agreement portion of this. What the action today does is basically authorizes me and whoever else needs to be involved in the negotiation of those performance agreements that are attached to the sales agreement.
Okay, but if we authorize what is down here on the agenda, we cannot change the 0%, the 600,000, correct?
That's a question. Dan, can the agenda item specifies the 600,000, 0% interest and all that? Can the board modify that in coming to the agreement, or is that a separate action?
You need to unmute, Dan.
Dan, you're muted.
Yes, the board could modify that, and we would modify the written resolution. So we would need to be specific on what the modification is, so that the resolution, when it's modified, when you go to approved minutes, it all reflects the same thing. So as long as the modification is very specific, like delete this and substitute that, we would be fine. You would just have to await the corrected resolution for the president to sign off on it.
Dan, the way that the caption is written, the sale of the property and the performance agreement are tied together. So if the sort of minimum terms were approved today at this meeting, the performance agreement still has to come back to the board. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think where we're focused on the sales agreement would be, would there be a down payment from legal department? We should try as much as possible to stay with what is normal, what's in that type of transaction. And we would normally look for some skin in the game, as it was referred to. So if any of that is going to be changed, then this should either come back to the board or it should be approved. Yes, if you want authority to execute a real estate sales agreement, which would be binding, then if you're going to require a certain down payment, then that change should be made, or the contract should come back to the board.
Okay. Board. What do you like, don't like? Not all at once, guys.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think this has a lot of really positive things. I definitely think there are still some things that we need to do to just make sure we do our due diligence. But I think this sounds very promising.
Good. Thank you. And I would have to agree with that. I think Chad's had a lot of really good insight and a lot of really good answers. But there still just seems to be a whole lot of questions that we would have to go through, which apparently would be the next step in all of this. Correct?
In terms of the performance agreement, yes.
Okay. So specifically, by voting on this motion today, what cannot be changed?
If you vote on this today, you're authorizing a sales price, a long term of 6 years to pay the sales price, and no down payment. So if you approve that, then the discretion for those points would be over with. If any of those terms don't fit, and this is assuming you get the development agreement that you need, but between now and the development agreement, those would be the terms. And so you've approved it for a sales price, a no down payment, a no interest note, and a 6-year term on the note, subject to a development agreement. So you have a good faith obligation to try to reach that development agreement. And it couldn't be a nitpicky little term that's not that substantial to say, no, we're not going to do it. In other words, it would require a good faith effort on both sides to reach an agreement on that provides the security the city needs and the discretion the developer needs.
Well, let me ask this question, Dan. If they wanted to change the terms and make the motion and change the terms that said we would like, 100,000 down payment, term would be then for 5 years and that sort of thing, can they do that through a motion to modify that?
Yes, they can just say the terms we're modifying, we're changing the 600, the 600,000 sale price with no down would become 600,000 with 100,000 down. There'd be 5 years left at 100,000 a year. With those modifications, they adopt the resolution. Then the resolution we present later today will have those terms in it for execution by the board president.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? I have quite a few, but I think the right time to do it would be whenever we're trying to negotiate the performance agreement. I don't know. I'm excited about this. I'm not trying to be a stick in the mud, but it just seems like all these things have been decided, and you need COCDC to come in and help, and all of a sudden it's like we Bill, Ed, Max, Laura, or Erica, do y'all have any other questions or concerns?
As long as we can be involved with input on the performance agreement, I think that's key. Like you said, to kind of be in the know on how the project's going to develop out.
But I'm in agreement with Ed. As long as as we see the key is performance agreement, it's not written yet. It's still in negotiation. So as long as we see all the terms in the performance agreement, we should be covered. Is that are you shaking your head, Mr. Soluri? Are you shaking your head? Yes.
No, that's correct. This would give the developer a contract to move forward, with what the developer needs to do and get the commitments the developer needs. And at the same time, we would work toward the development agreement terms.
And in turn, that should protect Mr. Weiser too.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Correct? Yeah. In turn, that should protect Mr. Weiser too, which he's got a significant interest in this project, and so he needs a certain amount of security himself.
Exactly, that's correct.
Guy, I know we've talked about milestones. Is there a reason why we wouldn't discuss those milestones to give the board some comfort today?
Well, we did. We basically outlined the main milestones in there, which is kind of the basis for that. We know that there's other things that need to be included in the performance agreement, but the milestones are, that we've laid out are the agreement with Texas Pacifico for track service, having the track in operation by the end, or being open for operation to everybody by the end of the year, having the initial track in place, and then having the periodic meetings that we need to coordinate are kind of the basic milestones in there. The rest of it's kind of in the details that we would negotiate in the performance agreement.
I think it's important to have guidance from the board members about what they feel are important milestones. what sort of accomplishment are you going to see, or what sort of accomplishment by Mr. Wisner is going to give you comfort that you've made the right decision 3 years from now or 4 years from now? What
Absolutely.
milestones would you like to see? That's important.
And I agree. In the performance agreements, we line that out. We make sure that everybody has input into that aspect of it. So that's one. We threw out some general ideas to get us started towards, let's lay out that agreement. But as Todd says, there's just lots of details and things that we need to include in there, which we will do as we're developing that. We just need the authorization to negotiate that performance agreement as part of this action today.
Yeah, the other part of, and Todd touched on it when he asked, how are we going to check up on these things? Having clear milestones that are easily measurable makes for good follow-up on our part. This, as our current routine is to have the internal auditor come through and determine that we're performing our obligations under our existing agreements, and the people we incentivize, the groups we incentivize, are performing in accordance with their obligations under an agreement. And so having that clarity for that internal auditor to say, if there's an obligation for the creation of an agreement with Texas Pacifico to service the line, that would be evidenced by obtaining a copy of an executed agreement. That's an easy one to determine. An executed agreement for a term which includes the time frame in question. So determining those milestones and making them clear and easy to understand, but also easy to follow up on, easy to audit, it also makes sense.
And that's typically what we do, is set up procedures and milestones and timelines and that sort of thing. So that's what we would be doing with the performance agreements.
So, Dan, we can move forward with this motion and still change the amounts, terms, and interest. Because I thought you said no, and then you said yes to Guy. So just clarify that, please.
Okay, you can change if you know the change that you want. In other words, you're talking about the sales contract, or I'm assuming.
I'm talking about the motion that's on this piece of paper right here.
Mm-hmm.
It says $600,000. If we vote and pass this, are we stuck to $600,000 over 6 years at 0%? What are we voting on specifically? I want to move forward and have these talks and have a good service agreement. And I want to do this, and I want to get it done fast. I want to know what we're specifically voting on here.
You're voting on that sales price, and you're voting on $100,000 a year term, and you're voting on 0% interest. Those are the terms that you're authorizing and directing the president to agree to or to execute. Whatever would go in a development agreement is totally not, there's no commitment there except to negotiate toward such an agreement. So, but if you're unsettled on a sales price, or you're unsettled on whether there's a down payment, and those things then will affect term, then you should not be authorizing this or adopting this resolution unless you know the change that you want to make in those terms: the sales price, the down payment, and the number of years resulting.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but Todd, you could add other stipulations. for example, move to approve with, as presented, with the exception that all ties be painted red. That kind of thing. You could add stipulations to that. Or you could say, move to approve as presented with the exception that 100,000, the first payment occur in the form of a down payment at closing. You can add those stipulations, and that's important for us to know so that we get it right.
And yeah, we can move forward like that, but we still don't even know if that's what we want to do, correct? Maybe the down payment's a good idea. Maybe it would be better without. Maybe, I mean, help me out here. We just seem to still have a lot of questions about what this specifically is going to do.
Pardon me, but is your resolution different than the one I received? This
I hope not.
2-page document?
Can I reread it?
Sure, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all.
Oh, yeah, if you take a look at the resolution as far as what you're authorizing, if you go down on the second page to the now therefore be it resolved, that's actually what you're going to be authorizing on that section 2. So
Mine just shows a price. It doesn't show a term.
Correct.
It just shows a price. And then
That's what the resolution I'm looking at just shows the price. It doesn't show a term. I know the terms and the down payment have been discussed, but the resolution only shows price.
it says
Right.
it's a combination with development performance agreement, but there are no years.
There's no years, there's no terms, there's no nothing to it. It just has the price of 600,000. And that's my question. If we're doing this, are we doing 0%? Are we not? I mean,
Well, you're not locked, sir. I would say you are not locked into anything because it says negotiate. I mean, what you're saying is 600,000 you're locked into, but you're not locked into an interest rate because there's not one specified. You're not locked into a term because there's not one specified. And what you're giving, in my opinion, you're giving the authority to negotiate and execute.
correct. That's exactly right. This is just giving me and whoever else the authority to negotiate the sale at $600,000, and that's it.
The terms are not specifically addressed except for the purchase price. That's the only term that specifically I see addressed. Now,
In the outline resolution, that's correct. I think that's correct. Dan, is that what you're reading?
Yeah, that's correct. I just had that
to make sure we're all on the same page, if you want more control, if you want to tighten those parameters in, give less latitude, that should be included in their motion. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, that's correct. Otherwise, you'd have to have this come back to the board.
Can I make a statement in regard to the caption we put on the agenda? The caption didn't go too far in specifying those terms because they're not in the resolution, but yet we specified that in the caption on there. So, basically the motion we would pass would just need to be, if we can agree on the sales price, to remove all the other aspects of that, the term, and the rest of it. And then that leaves us to negotiate within, if we agree that 600,000 is the price, then we proceed and go on that. And then we would be involved then with talking about the underlying terms in our sales contract negotiations.
Okay.
Is that correct?
So, this resolution gives COCDC board president the ability to negotiate the sale of the land for $600,000. So that does not mean we are tied to selling this land at $600,000. This says that we have the ability to negotiate the sale of that land for $600,000.
I believe that does tie you to the $600,000. It just doesn't tie you to any terms associated with the $600,000. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, that's,
So if you pass, this say that you
you
make a
couldn't,
motion.
you couldn't enter into a contract with, say there were some terms that you felt were very favorable, so you were going to sell it for 550,000. Under this resolution, you wouldn't have authority to negotiate that price of 600,000.
So you could, to move this forward, you could enter into a motion that says that you are authorizing the board president to negotiate a sales contract, remove the dollar amount in any terms. Could you say to be determined, a sales contract, price to be determined, and pass it that way? And then that way we can get into the negotiation of the sales contract without specifying a price or any other terms, just to say we're entering into that contract, we'll work that out, and then you can enter into the performance agreements that accompany that. So basically what you're authorizing at this is to be able to move forward with the negotiations of both of those documents.
Well, you're not authorizing a sales contract, you're authorizing one to be negotiated, which means that the contract for the sale would have to come back to the board with whatever was negotiated.
And I don't know if there's a way to escape that at this point. If we can't agree on we could agree on the $600,000 sales price, we could move this forward by saying we're going to negotiate the sales contract at $600,000, which is what we've gone along with in all of our discussions, and move on with that. But if we're going to change the sales price, well, in terms and all that, that means we're going to have to come back with something else.
Well, if Dan is saying it's got to come back anyway, and Todd is who is being authorized, Todd's got to be in the loop. And if you're saying and Dan, if you're saying it's got to come back anyway, there's no execution without further consideration by this board. Is that correct?
That's correct, because the basic terms are not agreed to, or the board isn't ready to approve the basic terms. So they would have to come back. For instance, you couldn't say, they could say we'll pass this motion, but will allow no interest as long as the note is for no more than 6 years or something like that. But without those terms in the motion, it's going to have to come back to the board before it goes to city council.
Okay. So what terms, list for me the terms you need for it to move ahead under a negotiate and execute scenario versus negotiate and bring back scenario.
A sales price, interest rate on the note, a term for the note, that by a certain date, the note has to be paid off. At least those three things.
And under that scenario, the way it's posted, this board could authorize the president to negotiate and execute a real estate sales and economic performance agreement.
Well, just the sales agreement would say that it's conditioned upon reaching a performance agreement. So the performance agreement is, it has to go to the board and then to city council. All that you have now, you would have a sales contract signed and those terms in there with certain time periods, including a time period within which a closing would take place, conditioned upon reaching a performance agreement.
Okay,
The only thing different about this than well, the only thing a little bit different about this than a normal buy-sell contract is that it's conditioned on reaching a performance agreement, which is not determined at the time that the sales contract is entered into. But the price and the basic terms, like the interest rate and when the note has to be paid off, those are in the sales contract. The only thing out there on the basic terms is that it's going to be conditioned upon reaching a performance agreement.
so the details, just to summarize and to make sure that we're all on the same page, especially me, the details of the performance agreement will have to be worked out and executed in a separate document.
Exactly.
Authorization to move forward with the process without delay would require that someone make a motion that includes terms, enough of the terms for Dan to say that's complete enough for us to negotiate and execute a real estate sales agreement. And so that takes the pressure off of this step for us to have the performance issues worked out in advance of execution of this agenda item. Does that make sense? This is really a two-step process. The real estate sales agreement, which will require a second step, which is the development of the economic development performance agreement. So if we are comfortable with the terms, 600,000, 100,000 a year, maybe 100,000 down up front, maybe not, whatever the board is comfortable with, we could move forward with today, which I think was your objective. Is that right, Guy?
Yes, sir.
To take to council that first step for ratification and to begin execution of that part and begin negotiation and execution of the real estate or the economic development performance agreement.
That's correct.
Look, the sales price is fine with us, I think.
Okay.
Okay. The only thing that would need to change on the sales price would benefit Mr. Wisner. I mean, if for some reason we decided to go down on the price or whatever, but terms are not listed here. So we're still going to have to negotiate the terms of the $600,000.
Todd, you're right. And I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that that was not included in the resolution. So in order to move forward, your motion, somebody's motion would have to specify those terms.
And I don't think we're there. I don't think we're at a place to throw the terms in there. I think we're in a good spot to say $600,000. Let's negotiate the terms. But I don't think we're ready today to throw a motion out there to say, yeah, here's what we're going to do.
Here's the deal, and where my confusion lies in this process as well. Our caption seems to be the thing that's in error. The resolution itself is for $600,000 period with no terms, which would allow us to negotiate if we agree 600,000 is that. It agrees. It's the caption on the agenda item that got into 0% interest and all that. So if we pass the resolution without the terms, we're good to go on negotiating a 600,000 contract with all the details, and then the performance agreement follows that and is conditional. So you know, what we're talking about here is 600,000 agreeable to the board, or do we need to change that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Max,
So
what were
the-
you gonna say?
Yeah, I was going to interject that I think at this point, the way I'm reading it, I know we're kind of beating a dead horse, but we're obviously doing our due diligence, is if we approve this motion as it states, we're agreeing on the sales price, and we are agreeing to allow our chairman, Todd, to negotiate those specific terms of that sales price. And you know, whether you do that today, tomorrow, next week, next month, right now, if we approve this motion as it is, we're basically just saying we agree to the price and we agree to authorize Todd on behalf of Coastal DC to negotiate those terms.
That is correct.
And
Is that
I'm
right,
all for
Dan?
that.
Dan, I just want to make, are you in agreement with that? Since that's all that's in the resolution is the sales price. So in doing a motion, we're not really following the verbiage in the agenda item. What we're saying is we authorize the 600,000, the president to negotiate a sales contract of 600,000. We eliminate the terms, yeah, and the rest of that verbiage, and then you're authorizing me to negotiate the performance agreement, and so that allows us to move forward. If I'm reading that correctly.
Well, with respect to the performance agreement, fine, because that is going to go to the board with, you know, the substance of the agreement. There is a problem with just authorizing only a sales price on the property. The board would be approving a sales price, but not, you know, when it has to be paid, and not whether or not there's interest, and not whether or not there's a down payment.
But that is not in the resolution. All that is in that resolution
Right.
is
So if they approve that resolution, they'd be saying they're giving that authority the board president. With that much open, the board would be approving something that they really don't have any idea of what the final agreement is. And in my opinion, that should go back to the board the same way as a development agreement would go back to the board, because it's little more than a concept if you only have the sales price. So again, if you want to make a motion and say move to approve with the addition that there be no down payment, or that a down payment be negotiated, and that the note be paid in full within 5 years or 6 years, and that there be no interest rate, then the board is authorizing, hey, no interest rate, we've already looked at that. If you would negotiate something with an interest rate, you know, that's probably going to be okay, because the board went as far as saying you don't even have to have an interest rate. But I think that you have to have that much for board approval, unless you want to go back to the board and really you would just pass a motion to bring it back with terms negotiated.
So, but let me kind of interject this then. I mean, typically, for my time on the board, we typically don't have a meeting and do negotiations in a public forum, right? So this is something that I think if those terms are required, I think we're going to have to discuss those in executive.
It qualifies for executive, has to do with the value of real property. Yes.
Okay, so I mean, would it be appropriate then to pause discussion on this, defer it until we meet on an executive, which we have scheduled, I believe, right after this motion anyway.
It's not posted to go to executive session, so the
We
answer,
cannot discuss it today, but I think that we owe ourselves and Mr. Wisner a conversation about exactly what we're doing before we just do.
Dan, the board cannot request that this item be pulled into executive session?
no, well, it's on the regular agenda, but it's not posted to go into executive session.
No, don't they have some authority to pull regular agenda items into executive?
Let's look at the agenda and see if they have a similar statement to what city council has. Just a minute.
Dan, we already have a caption that could potentially cover this item as we're discussing other projects in executive session. So would that caption allow for us to have this discussion as well?
Shannon, is the note on there that says that all regular agenda items are subject to discussion in executive session?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I just want to verify that that's there.
It appears to be.
Cut out on the land there, Julia.
Julia said it appears to be, and she's the city clerk.
Julia, you're muted.
Yeah, but now I've got to mute this.
Yes, I do see a paragraph there on the signature page that
Right
talks about.
beneath Nora's signature. It's the first paragraph right beneath Nora's signature.
The board reserves the right to consider business out of posted order and/or meet in a closed session on any agenda item should the need arise and if applicable pursuant to the authorization of Title V, Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code.
Okay, so we're good because there is a public notice about the specific property. And negotiation of a sales contract on the regular agenda. So you'd have to move and take a vote to put that into executive session.
I'll make the motion to move to continue this discussion in the executive session.
Second.
I have a motion that we move line item A from our special agenda, that we move to executive session. I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor say aye. Ed?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Erica?
Aye.
Max?
Aye.
Todd? Aye. All right, motion carries. We will move into executive session on line item A. Moving on to line item B. Consider approving the allocation of up to $10,000 from the sales proceeds of 5.544 acres of land at the industrial park to Dakota Investments, Inc. for the installation of a monitoring manhole to protect a monitoring well, which impedes proposed construction on the property. Presentation made by Mr. Bob Schneeman.
Thank you. This will be a relatively quick item, I think. As the board is aware, we sold 5.544 acres of land at the industrial park to Dakota Investments. In their due diligence on the land, they found a a monitoring well. That monitoring well is associated with monitoring the underground water quality. It's a result of an underground storage tank leak over at Ethicon, I believe, years ago. It is being monitored by a firm out of Midland on behalf of the TCEQ. And so, unfortunately, the location of the well is sort of inopportune for their site plan. If we could see the next slide, please. This is what the monitoring well looks like. It's actually a steel casing with a top on it and a lock, and about a 3 foot by 3 foot concrete slab around it. Next slide, please. This shows sort of the location of the well. There you go, in relation to their building. I'll show you a picture of the building here in just a minute. And it's a very sort of obtrusive location for that well to be. You can see it's almost dead center on the main driveway coming in from Venture Drive to the right. It is also pretty much centered on some truck bays along that that particular side of the building. If we go to the next slide. So it would be out in the asphalt, out right about there. Good. It's just not a good location. When we've encountered these on other properties that we've sold, they've been able to work around them. This one, unfortunately, hits about dead center in the property, so it's been very difficult to work around. So we contacted TCEQ's consultant in Midland, discussed it with them, and the solution that we've come up with is to provide a monitoring manhole over that well. The way that process will work is that we will protect the well in some form during construction, and when the contractor has the subgrade of the parking lot about to grade, we'll have to get a licensed well driller to come in. Next slide, please. And what they would do is they would install this, it's called a rain-tight monitoring well manhole. It's not very large. It's about 12 inches diameter. Has a bit of a foundation under it, and would have a concrete slab around it. But it allows them access to the top of that well, and they'd have to remove the steel casing that you may recall seeing, and cut the top of the well down to just below the elevation of the top of the proposed manhole. Next slide. I obtained an estimate from the licensed well driller who normally does work for TCEQ in this area and also for that consultant. His preliminary estimate was $2,875. The engineers are going to be involved in, by engineers, I mean the consultant engineers that work for TCEQ will be involved in monitoring and verification of the modifications to the well. Estimating that would be about $3,000. And then purchase and installation of materials that may be coincidental to this could go as high as $3,000, which would be a total estimated cost of $8,875. I don't anticipate that it will be that much, but in order to not hold up the Dakota Investment Project, I'm asking the board to approve a maximum of $10,000 so that we can get this issue taken care of and keep them moving forward in their construction. And they are talking about starting to move dirt next week on that project, believe it or not. Answer any questions?
Oh, Sounds good. Get her done. Any other questions or concerns from the board? Do I still have a board out there?
Todd, is
Yes,
there a motion
I'm still
necessary for
here.
that?
Yes.
Can you tell me how long does it you expect will be on the project? You say they're going to start next week. When will it be
Yes.
completed?
Yes, sir. I'm not sure what their total construction schedule would be. I would anticipate probably 6 months to 8 months to completion. Now,
Okay.
the manhole, I mean, that's probably a 2-day process. It won't take very long at all.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? All right, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you, Director Roscoe. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you, Director Freeze. Any other discussion? All right, I will call for the vote. Bill,
Aye.
Garland,
Aye.
Max,
Aye.
Ed,
Aye.
Erica,
Aye.
and I am also in the aye. Motion passes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We will now move to closed session. Executive session under the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government Chapter 551, Open Meeting Subchapter D, exceptions to the requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.087, to deliberate regarding commercial or financial information that the board is receiving from business prospects with whom the economic development negotiations are being conducted, and discuss financial or other incentives relating to the following projects. Project 2019-P338, Project 2020-D003, Project 2020 S202. We are now in executive session. It is 10:43 a.m.
Okay, and moving into the executive session, we'll be doing that in Teams meeting, which you have the link to go there. And we'll be placed in a waiting room in Zoom. Once that meeting's over, we'll be coming back into Zoom to conclude any action on that. Yes.
Guy, if I may add, per Dan, you also need to add in that we're going to still continue the discussion about the rail on 5A. So you also need to state that, Todd. And to let you know that Erica has also dropped out already out of the meeting.
Okay. Erica has dropped out?
Yes, sir.
Do we have so we don't have a.
Garland is still on though.
Do we have a quorum?
Yes, because Garland's on now.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and finish up.
Question in regard to who is allowed in the executive session. Of course, the board. Is that something that Mr. Wisner needs to be in, or is it?
Normally he would not be in. If there was a reason, a question that the board needed answered, he could be invited in to answer a question and then he would leave again.
Okay, and then how about Mr. Looney and Mr. Horton?
That's up to the board, but they could certainly be there.
Todd, do you need them in the board?
I'd like to have Looney and Horton there, sure.
Okay. And who's that with Neo that's in the meeting?
Hey, sorry, that's me. I'm switching devices.
Okay. All right. So we will go in. Do we want to take like a 5-minute break and get into Teams at, what is it, in 5 minutes?
Okay, wait, I need to reread, or not reread, but I need to add to our closed session agenda that we are moving special agenda item A and we will be discussing it in closed session. Okay, it is 11:49, and we are out of executive session. We have one item that we need to consider back to the special agenda item A.
We're almost through.
And I move to adopt the resolution as written, with the exception that the board president be authorized to negotiate a sales price not to exceed $600,000, a term not to exceed 6 years, and an interest rate not to exceed 3.25%, and all other provision of the resolution not modified are moved to be adopted and approved. So I made the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Dindal. I have a second. Any further discussion before I call for the vote? Thank God. I will now call for the vote. Bill?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Garland?
Aye.
Max?
Aye.
And I am also with the ayes. The ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, we will now move to any other follow-up and administrative issues, which we have none. Now I will move for, please, dear God, give me a motion for adjournment.
I moved that the meeting be adjourned.
Thank you,
second.
Garland, and thank you, Max. Any other discussion? Good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are out of here. It is 11:51. Thank you all very much.